Is much more complex because to draw somebody into that world, and the only one I would write about is an indigenous world, California indigenous world. It is incredibly complex. I spent the last 20 years of my life, and I'm still considering myself a student, and I've gotten to know and been mentored by a great number of elders who are steeped in their tradition, and I'm just barely touching the surface. It is so complex, and it is alien. It is alien to this culture. And that's the big thing, the way of thinking of elders, especially those who have grown up learning with another language, and English is their second language. Their way of thinking is so different. It's hard to get my head wrapped around it, and then translate that back to English. Like conceptually, it's very difficult, but it's a fascinating process because I'm not writing it, but I try to live it. That's part of what I do. Try to incorporate that into the work I do in cultural preservation, because one of the first lessons I learned is the ends don't justify the means, the ends are created by the means. So whatever you do, even if it's a good thing in the end, if you did it in a dishonest fashion, you've just screwed it up. You just ruined it. It's not worth it to a lot of the elders. That's the way I was taught. So you have to live that life. You can't just talk about it and then do it in the end and wrap it up with a little bow. You have to live it. And that's the hard part, to learn how to live it in this world. I work in Silicon Valley the last 3.5 decades. Talk about alien world to me, and this big contrast where I go from a highly technological world where I work with high-speed telecommunication systems, and then literally the next day I'm in my homeland down in Central California. The park that we go to mostly is Los Padres National Forest, and it's pretty much untouched. Large parts of it are untouched. And there's still places in there that we won't talk about because we don't want the Forest Service people to find out for the reasons we were talking about earlier. So they know a lot of our sites, petroglyph sites and others, and some they still don't know about because we won't tell them for that reason. And guess what? The ones they don't know about are the ones in the best condition. What a coincidence, huh?
And the most ancient way of storytelling was verbal, so,
yeah.
And Indians were very much part of that as well. There's a question in the back?
Yeah, when you see fictional cultures, are there any elements that you think are an easy thing to miss when you are building a culture for your story? Or components of a culture, like, do people miss I'm just random ideas, but do people miss sort of the way money is treated, or other types of transactional values, or do people miss generational values, or is there something that you see people frequently forget to include when they are creating a new culture?
I would say that most things get omitted most of the time. I run a series of online live discussions. We meet on Thursdays at 11 a.m. on Google+, and we talk about world building topics. And so far we've talked about like 35 or 40 different topics, and each one we've talked about for an hour. And there's always more. We get to the end of the hour and we're like, oh, well, we didn't talk about that, or, oh, well, we'll have to talk about that another time. This culture and world are so complex that you cannot encapsulate them. Any description of any event, seemingly a very, very simple one, is going to be rendered differently by different people. Okay? One of my classes, we did this exercise where, the teacher said, okay, I'm going to have you guys all write down what it is that I'm about to do right now. And he basically walked to the door, picked up a book, walked back, set the book down on the podium, and then said, okay. And then we all went, around and we wrote down, and we read out what we had written down about what he'd done. And they were all different. People called him by different names, depending on how well they knew him. Like, they talked about the door differently, they talked about the podium differently. So what I'm trying to say is, when you're creating a story experience of a culture, most of the work is done by the reader, okay? And what you're doing is you're basically dropping a drip of water into a pond and creating ripples there, right? And it's the pattern